Welcome to the Football Film Room Show. I'm Nick Kehoe, and we've got another great episode for you today. We're going to continue our preview of the 2026 NFL season, going division by division. Today, we're going to talk about the AFC North. And as always, we'll go in order of the division standings last year, which means we're going to start with the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers, who shocked a lot of people in the NFL world last year by winning the division, although I think you could say it was somewhat of a weakened division. They were dealing with the Baltimore Ravens, who weren't necessarily dealing with a full deck. Bengals didn't have Joe Burrow for a significant portion of the year, didn't have a defense for the entire year. The Browns were the Browns, so the Steelers kind of swooped in and stole the division and got themselves a playoff spot. Of course, they didn't do much. They lost their 7th straight playoff game under Mike Tomlin, and that really spelled the end. Tomlin stepped down at the end of the year. I think everyone sensed it was just time to go in another direction. He had a heck of a career with the Steelers. There's no question about that. Won a Super Bowl, went to 2 Super Bowls, 19 years, no losing seasons. You do have to give him credit for that, but the Steelers became kind of stale over the last decade, I guess you could say. Predictable on defense, not much on offense really after Ben Roethlisberger had that serious elbow injury back in 2019. And that, as much as anything, was the reason why the Steelers, even though they were decent every year or good every year, they really couldn't do much more than just make it to the playoffs. Now, I spoke a bit about this a few episodes ago back when Aaron Rodgers announced that he was coming back, so I won't go into great detail today, but I think a lot of Steelers fans were hoping when Tomlin stepped down that they would go out and get the next young stud defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator to be their head coach, maybe a Jesse Minter type, maybe someone from the Sean McVay tree, Kyle Shanahan tree. Instead, they went with Mike McCarthy. Now, everyone was treating this as if the Steelers just replaced one coach with the exact same coach, merely because McCarthy was from the same era, I guess you could say, as Tomlin. But I kind of disagree with that sentiment because McCarthy being a offense-first head coach is a significant change for the Steelers. That changes everything about the risk-reward profile with this team, the decision-making with this team. What do you do at the end of the half when there's 2 minutes left? How aggressive are you? Well, if you have an offensive-first head coach, probably going to be a little more aggressive. If you have a defense-first head coach, probably going to be more conservative. Same with going for it on 3rd down, 4th down, deciding to kick a field goal or trying to get a touchdown. All those things change with a new head coach, with an offense-first coach like McCarthy. And the big thing that you have to be optimistic about with the Steelers is that McCarthy has had success with the passing game everywhere he's gone. And he's done well with his quarterback everywhere he's been. You can start with Brett Favre at the end of his career. Favre in 2005 had just an atrocious season. And then Mike McCarthy came in 2006 and got him to play some respectable football. 2007, they came back, and Brett Favre had one of the best years of his career. Probably the best season since he won 3 straight MVPs in the middle of the 90s. Packers went 13-3, made it to the NFC Championship game. But a big part of that, a big reason for that, was that Favre was playing back to form at age 38. Then, of course, Aaron Rodgers took over, and McCarthy has to get credit for turning him into a Mount Rushmore quarterback. One of the best we've ever seen, 4-time MVP, Super Bowl champion, Super Bowl MVP. I know it didn't end great in Green Bay, but clearly they've mended fences if they're working together again. Then McCarthy went on to Dallas, and Dak Prescott made a leap in his career once McCarthy got there. He became a different type of quarterback. He started to anticipate better, started to process more quickly. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but his career took off. He had a couple of MVP-caliber seasons under McCarthy. So the good news for the Steelers is I have to believe that their passing game is going to be better than last year. And I believe that not just because of McCarthy, but because they have the receivers to have a more effective passing game. Aside from DK Metcalf, they went out and got Michael Pittman Jr., who's 6'4", another big receiver. You put him and DK next to Mount Washington, Pat Freiermuth at tight end. They've got a lot of big bodies, and they can play above the defense. They also got Jeremy Bernard, drafted him in the 2nd round. A lot of people think he was the steal of the draft at the receiver position. So they've got a lot of weapons there. The big question is, can they protect Aaron Rodgers? Because Aaron Rodgers, he can still throw the hell out of the ball. He's still as good at throwing it as anyone in the NFL. Last year, he seemed like he was back to normal, one more year removed from that Achilles injury. So he was putting the ball where he wanted to. The issue was, did he feel protected? In those games where he felt like he had time, where he played against some of the worst pass rushes in the league, he hung on to the ball. He let routes develop downfield. He took more shots downfield and was a more effective passer. In those games where he was under pressure or thought he was going to be under pressure, was anticipating pressure, the entire game became, how quickly can I get rid of the ball? and that led to some ineffective offense, some ineffective passing. For the entire year, Rodgers led the NFL in percentage of throws coming out in less than 2.5 seconds. So he's thinking quickly. He's trying to win with his mind at the line of scrimmage, trying to get the ball out before the pass rush can get to him. And a big part of that is trust, because every time he did try to hold the ball and push the ball downfield against some of the better pass rushing teams, he got clobbered last year. So the big question is, even though they have these new receivers, these new toys for Rodgers to play with, will they be able to hold out up front? And the Steelers didn't take any chances during the draft. They went out and they took Maxi Hanachor in the first round, took Jennings Dunker in the third round. Both those guys are big, mauling type of offensive linemen. You hope that will help in the passing game, but it certainly should help in the run game. And I know Mike McCarthy, he traditionally is not a head coach, play caller who loves to just ground and pound, run the ball down after down. But let's face it, with Aaron Rodgers at his age, with his lack of desire to take a bunch of big hits, again, that's not questioning his toughness. He played through a broken wrist last year and a ton of injuries the year before, coming back from that Achilles tear. He's as tough as they come, but he still wants to get rid of the ball. He's not going to the park every Sunday to look to get the crap kicked out of him. So you're not going to want to drop him back 40 times a game. You're going to want to have a steady dose of running the ball, and having some mauling offensive linemen like Dunker and Hanachor, that's really going to help. Now, they went out and they got Rico Dowdle this offseason. You pair him with Jaylen Warren, and you potentially have something that's going to be a good complement, going to keep the pass rush second-guessing, is this a pass or a run, keep the defensive line on its toes, and that might help with the pass rush. That might help with the protection as well. But from an offensive perspective, I'm very curious to see how this goes, but I'd be optimistic if I was a Steelers fan. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, the Steelers didn't make many changes. They added a few players to the secondary, cornerback Jamel Dean, safeties Jaquan Brisker and Darnell Savage. But the biggest thing is that this will not be the Mike Tomlin defense. And I know he had a bunch of different defensive coordinators, but more or less, the defense they played, the decisions they made as a defense, it was all part of Tomlin's system. He was at a high level calling the shots if he wasn't calling each individual defensive play. And that's one of the areas where the Steelers got a little stale. You've probably seen the interviews of Julian Edelman talking about, hey, we always knew what the Steelers were going to be doing. So the Steelers having a new defensive coordinator in Patrick Graham, it at very least changes what offenses can expect. Now, Patrick Graham, he's not new to this. He has 7 years of defensive coordinator experience under his belt. Hasn't had a lot of success, but you could probably say that's more a result of the personnel he's had. He's been the defensive coordinators for the Raiders, the Dolphins, the Giants, a few franchises that have not done that well, especially on that side of the ball over the last few years, and haven't had a lot of great players on that side of the ball in the last few years. But Graham comes from a long line of great defensive coordinators and defensive minds. Spent a bunch of time under Bill Belichick in New England, spent a couple years under Steve Spagnuolo with the Giants, spent a year with Brian Flores with the Dolphins, and then spent last year under Pete Carroll. So that's a lot of great defensive minds that he'll be able to draw from this season. He's always predominantly been a single high style of defensive coordinator, but he's had enough variability in terms of playing man, playing zone, blitzing, not blitzing, that he seems to fit his scheme to his personnel, which makes a lot of sense based on where he came from, based on coming from that Belichick school, Steve Spagnuolo school, and hopefully he can apply that to the Steelers. Steelers do still have some talent on defense. I think that was one of the big things, the big disappointments of last season was how poorly that defense played because they had some talent. And from the beginning of the year until the end, you saw blown coverages, you saw missed assignments, huge gaps in the run game. Even in Week 18 against the Ravens with their season on the line, about 2 minutes to go, they were blowing coverages against Lamar Jackson. So nothing got corrected throughout the course of the year, and that was a big issue for them. Allowed a lot of big plays, kept them on the field. They ended up not being a very good defense last year. So they certainly hope that changes under Patrick Graham because the division is going to be tougher this year. I think the Steelers have a pretty favorable schedule early on, so it'll come down to what they can do in the second half of the season. All right, let's move over to the Baltimore Ravens, who are also undergoing significant change at the head coaching position. John Harbaugh, who had been there since 2008, so had a great 18-year run in Baltimore. He was let go at the end of the year, and the Ravens replaced him with former Chargers defensive coordinator Jesse Minter. Now, Minter had been in L.A. under Jim Harbaugh for a couple years, had also been at Michigan, coached under Mike Macdonald for a little bit. And that's really the interesting thing about this move to bring in Jesse Minter, because stylistically, the Ravens are going to get back to looking like what they did under Mike Macdonald back in 2022 and 2023. 2023, of course, they ended up being the number one seed in the AFC, lost the AFC Championship at home, but it wasn't because of the defense. They allowed 17 points, and that was it. And then, of course, you saw Macdonald take that defense to new heights last year in Seattle and go on to win Super Bowl 60. But that has to get you excited if you're a Ravens fan, to see a defensive coach coming in who's going to install a very similar system to what Mike Macdonald plays. Now, as far as Minter's system goes, it's a high percentage of split safeties, one of the highest in the league, plays predominant zone, mostly rushes just 4, although does a lot of those sim pressures. When he does blitz, does a very good job of breaking down protections. But one of the most interesting things about this defense and the personnel fit is that the Ravens have a safety in Kyle Hamilton, who's going to be used just like Derwin James was used in Minter's defense in L.A. Going to have him play near the line of scrimmage, in the box, have him play deep, play in the slot. He'll contribute in the run game, drop out in the coverage. He'll blitz occasionally. You, of course, saw something similar with what Mike Macdonald did with Nicky Manwari last year in Seattle in that system. So I think you're going to see a big year for Kyle Hamilton. And Hamilton's been used that way a lot in the past. So it's just a matter of this being a great fit in Minter's system. One interesting stat I'll tell you is that last year, the 3 safeties who ended up blitzing at the highest frequency were James, Manwari, and Kyle Hamilton. So seems like it's a perfect fit. Now, the other big thing for the Ravens, and another reason why you should be excited if you're a Ravens fan, is that last year they couldn't get a pass rush. Injuries played a huge role. Lost Nnamdi Madubuike early in the season. It seems like he might be coming back. We'll see how healthy he is. But more excitingly, the Ravens went out and signed Trey Hendrickson. Hendrickson is a pure pass rusher. Last year, he missed a significant amount of time, only played about 7 games. But the 2 years before that, he had 17.5 sacks in both seasons. And he's also had seasons where he's had 13 and 14 sacks. So he's going to be a huge addition to that pass rush, and that's important for a defense that primarily relies on rushing 4 to get to the quarterback. Now, offensively, there are certainly some questions because the Ravens are bringing in a brand new offensive coordinator, Declan Doyle, who was in Chicago under Ben Johnson last year, and before that spent about 5 years with Sean Payton in both Denver and New Orleans. This will be the first time that he's calling plays. You'd like to believe that he's going to bring in those Ben Johnson elements to the offense or some of those Sean Payton concepts. I don't know if this means they're going to try to spread it out more. You don't know what's in him as a play caller. Of course, it'll be his first year doing it in the NFL. The only thing I hope is that this doesn't turn into a situation where they're saying, how do we keep Lamar Jackson fresh? How do we save his legs for the end of the year? No. To me, you've got to go all in right now with Lamar Jackson. You've got to utilize his legs as much as possible while he's still the explosive player that he is, because it sets up so much with their passing game. Defenses can't just pin their ears back and get after him. A lot of them choose to mush rush or be super conscious of not rushing further upfield in Lamar Jackson's drop, and that impacts the pass rush. Just the fact that they have to account for his legs and the potential for a scramble, that impacts the pass rush. That gives him more time, lets the Ravens push the ball downfield more if they want. They can utilize play action. Again, give those routes time to develop. The play action itself, RPOs, any sort of threat of Lamar Jackson keeping the ball or running, that can manipulate defenders, that can hold linebackers. So you can't take away his legs. And I think we've seen throughout his career when his legs are less of a factor due to injury or just the decisions not to run quite as much, that's when Lamar Jackson does struggle. That's when he doesn't seem quite like Superman. And last year, he was obviously dealing with injuries when he did play, missed some time. When he came back, it didn't seem like he was 100% healthy. Ended up rushing for a career-low 349 yards. And you saw that kind of play out in the passing game. His production was almost cut in half in many different important categories. So whatever Declan Doyle does, to me, it's got to be, let's still feature his legs. When you have someone who's as special as Lamar Jackson is as a runner, you have to take advantage. You have to capitalize before he loses a step. Now, for Lamar Jackson's part, I have the utmost confidence that he'll be able to pick up whatever Declan Doyle puts down, whatever system they run. He'll be able to manage it. He'll be able to thrive in it. He's won 2 MVPs with 2 different offensive coordinators. Greg Roman, of course, in 2019. Todd Monken in 2023. So there's no doubt in my mind that he can add a third one with Doyle. But to me, the bottom line with the Ravens is that they should be the favorite for the division. I believe they are the favorite for the division. And they've got the makings of a team that if they can stay healthy, if Lamar Jackson can stay healthy, the offense is likely going to be humming, and that defense is going to be much improved from last year. And if that's the case, seeing them in L.A. at the end of the year for the Super Bowl is not out of the question. All right, let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. And if you're a Bengals fan or you follow the Bengals in any way, shape, or form, you know what their issue has been over the last several years. Joe Burrow getting hurt and the defense being atrocious. And last year, both of those things set this team back once again. Burrow got hurt in week 2, ended up having to have surgery on his foot, didn't come back till Thanksgiving. By that point, the Bengals were kind of out of it. And then the defense managed to be even worse than they had been in previous years. You thought that was going to be hard to do, but they ended up finishing 30th in points allowed, 31st in yards allowed, 32nd, dead last in yards per play allowed. They were just a mess in pretty much everything they did. Somehow they managed to be top 10 in turnovers, and that probably saved them from being even worse than what they were. But this was a bad defense, and it started up front. They obviously lost Trey Hendrickson midway through the year, so their pass rush was impacted. Finished in the bottom 10 in pressure percentage. They also had the second highest frequency of passes, taking 2.5 seconds or more to be released, meaning quarterbacks had extra time to throw when they were playing the Bengals. Their run defense was dead last in yards allowed. And these are both things that obviously they need to be fixed. Because let's say Joe Burrow is healthy. Let's say he comes back and has a season like he did in 2024, where he almost won the MVP or was certainly in the running. You remember that the Bengals didn't make the playoffs that year, right? Joe Burrow played in every game, played at an MVP caliber level, and the team still went 9-8 because their defense was so bad. So let's say Burrow comes back this year and he plays a full 17, and he's picking apart defenses, throwing the ball to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. Man, we need to see that combination back in the playoffs. I'll just side note, we got to see those guys in January playing football again because it's been too long. It's been since 2022. Haven't made the playoffs the last 3 years. But let's say they had that. Let's say that they are the offense we all expect them to be if everyone's healthy. What are teams going to do? How are teams going to try to stop them? It is nearly impossible to stop that combination of Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins. So how are teams going to do it? They're going to do it by possessing the ball, trying to keep them off the field. That's why run defense for the Bengals is so critical. That's why they can't have another year where they're dead last in the league against the run. You don't want to allow teams to keep Joe Burrow and company off the field. So give the Bengals credit because they somewhat uncharacteristically gave up their top 10 pick, sent him over to the Giants for Dexter Lawrence. Now, Dexter Lawrence is probably the best or one of the top 3 defensive tackles, even with the down year he had last year. And he's going to help everywhere. He's going to help with the pass rush. He's going to help defend against the run. He's going to keep linebackers clean, going to eat up double teams. And even though last year he didn't put up big numbers statistically, which, I mean, defensive tackles kind of don't really. He had 9 sacks the year before or 9.5 sacks the year before, which is kind of an anomaly for a defensive tackle. But what he does, you watch him on film, he gets so much attention. You get the protection sliding his way. You get double teams all the time. That does open up things for other players. So just having him on the field is going to help both in the run game and with that pass rush. Now, the Bengals did lose Trey Hendrickson. As I mentioned earlier, he signed with the Ravens this offseason, but they've done a pretty good job of transforming this defensive line. In addition to Lawrence, they added Jonathan Allen to play inside, added edge rusher Boye Mafe. In the second round of the draft, they took Cassius Howell. So they revamped this defensive line. You do have to give them credit for that, but that's the most important thing with this team. Aside from Joe Burrow staying healthy, this defense has to get its act together. Because personally, as a football fan, I'm getting sick and tired of looking at Joe Burrow's career and thinking to myself, this is Dan Marino all over again. Makes the Super Bowl in his second season, makes the AFC Championship game in his third season. Everyone thinks they're going to be back every single year, and then you go through the late 80s with the Dolphins where they didn't make the playoffs at all, and then you go through the rest of Marino's career where he didn't make it back to the Super Bowl, only played in one more AFC Championship game his entire career. Well, the Bengals are in that late 80s period of Joe Burrow's career. Haven't made the playoffs for the last 3 seasons. I get worried that they're squandering his career because they're doing Bengals stuff. Now, again, I will give them credit. Last year, they gave big contracts to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. This year, They traded their 10th overall pick for Dexter Lawrence, so they are trying. I do want to give them credit for that, but just got to see it on the field. Just got to see it all come together because this team can win the division if their defense is just middle of the pack. You'd prefer them to be better, but just give me middle of the pack this year. Baby steps. Next year, you can be top 10. Just give me something this year so that Burrow, Higgins, Chase, we can see them in January again playing meaningful football. All right, let's get to our last team in the AFC North, the Cleveland Browns. They also underwent a fair amount of change this offseason. Fired Kevin Stefanski, 2-time NFL Coach of the Year. Brought in Todd Monken, former offensive coordinator of the Ravens. And then, of course, from a personnel standpoint, they traded away Myles Garrett, the best pass rusher in the game. Got a decent return for him. First-round draft pick, Jared Verse. On the offensive side of the ball, they have a ton of turnover on the offensive line. They're basically going to have 5 new players starting for them. A combination of free agent signings and draft picks from this year. So going to be a lot of change with the Browns. The biggest question everyone has, though, is, of course, who's going to play quarterback and does it matter? Now, I don't know what to make of reports this offseason. I do know that if Deshaun Watson is the quarterback, something terribly, terribly wrong has happened. Because that shouldn't be the case this year. Deshaun Watson, he's not in the future plans for the Browns. Even if he has a decent year this year, which I think is the ceiling. Let's say Deshaun Watson becomes the starter. He's not going to be a top 5 quarterback like he was back in 2019, 2020. At best, maybe he sniffs the top half of the league, maybe 12 to 16, somewhere in there. At best, he does that. And if he does that, so what? You're not giving him more money next year. You're not keeping him on this team beyond his contract. He's not the quarterback of the future. The guy's played 19 games in the last 5 seasons. Has had significant injuries to his throwing shoulder, ruptured his Achilles, then had a setback. I think he re-ruptured it right during his rehab. Hasn't played since 2024. I mean, what's the point? What's it going to get you? This season needs to be all about figuring out what's going on in 2027 and beyond. Are we going in the right direction? Do we have the right pieces? Where do we have holes? Where do we need to fill those holes in next year's draft? Is Todd Monken the right fit for us? Is our new defensive coordinator the right fit for us? Do we potentially have a young quarterback of the future on our roster? They drafted 2 last year, Dylan Gabriel and Shedeur Sanders. They need to come out of this year knowing, okay, let's invest in one of these quarterbacks and use our multiple first-round draft picks next year on weapons to support them. Or they need to come out of this year knowing definitively we don't have a quarterback on this roster that's going to lead us into the future. We need to dip into that 2027 quarterback class, which is expected to be very good. Now, the reason to play Shedeur Sanders and give him every opportunity to fail instead of Deshaun Watson is that if Shedeur has a good year, he is a quarterback that you can say, all right, maybe he is our future. I don't anticipate it happening. I've talked to you on this podcast. I've written breakdowns. I'm not a huge fan of his game in general, the way he plays on the field. He plays like he's Josh Allen, just without the Josh Allen talent. He needs to play with more rhythm and timing. He's too slow in everything he does, from his processing to his footwork to his level of urgency, decision-making, everything. Everything needs to be faster. Made some terrible decisions last year, had some really bad interceptions. Looked like a rookie, so it's excusable, but he's got a long way to go to look anything like a franchise quarterback to me. Now, I'm not saying it can't happen. I am saying it's not likely, but I won't rule it out. Either way, though, it makes sense to give him that opportunity. It makes sense to give him a full 17 games. Because if he doesn't work out and he plays terribly, all right, now you're set up pretty well for the draft next year, and you know for sure he's not your quarterback of the future. But what if he plays well? What if you look at him and you say, oh, he might be the quarterback of the future for this franchise? Look at the jump he made from year 1 to year 2. He's a great fit for Todd Monken's system. We've got our guy. If you find that out, now you're 2 years ahead of where you would have been had you waited until 2027, drafted a quarterback, lived through that rookie's growing pains, and then really had to wait until 2028 to see him take off. You'd be 2 years ahead if Shedeur Sanders works out. If Deshaun Watson is your quarterback and he plays well, who cares? Who cares? And by the way, I'd say the same thing for Dylan Gabriel. You know, if he beats out Shedeur Sanders, fine, give him the shot. I don't think he will. I don't think the Browns have necessarily treated him like a quarterback that they are prioritizing, considering they just gave away his jersey number to Jared Verse when he got traded for. But, hey, if he beats out Shedeur, give him the shot. Maybe he's your young quarterback that is the future of the franchise. Again, I don't think he is, but the whole point is this year is about figuring all of that out, confirming what you have in the quarterback room. Now, outside of the quarterback position, I do like a lot of what the Browns have done. They are trying to build up their offense around the quarterback position. Drafted tackle Spencer Fano, 9th overall. Drafted wide receiver Casey Concepcion at the end of the first round. Drafted wide receiver Denzel Boston at the beginning of the second round. Added a bunch of players to that offensive line, like I said earlier, during free agency. Have a pretty good running back in Quinshawn Judkins. Have a good receiver in Jerry Jeudy returning. Have a good tight end in Harold Fannin. They've got some good pieces on offense. And then defensively, they're good at all three levels. Yes, they lost Myles Garrett, but Jared Verse, he's no slouch. He's had 2 pretty good years with the Rams as a pass rusher, and I expect him to keep growing and getting better. They have linebacker Carson Schlesinger, who won Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. Rookie Mason Graham, who was 22nd among defensive tackles and quarterback pressures. He did play a role in helping Myles Garrett break the sack record. You got to give him some credit. They've got talented players in the secondary in Denzel Ward and Grant Delpit. I mean, this defense has talent. They have the ability to fly around. Now, again, I'm not predicting anything big for the Browns this year. They might play a little bit better than everyone's expecting. I think we're all expecting them to go 3-14, 4-13, something like that, be one of the top picks in next year's draft. They might be a little bit better than that based on the talent they have on the defensive side of the ball and around the quarterback position. But either way, this season's all about positioning themselves for 2027 and beyond. Because until they finally get their quarterback, which the Browns have been searching for forever, this franchise just isn't going to take the next step. That's it for today's show. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to like and subscribe on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Substack, wherever you listen. As always, I'll encourage you to go check out footballfilmroom.com. Got all 22 breakdowns on there. We're creating profiles for all 32 teams, previewing the 2026 season. A lot of the information there will mirror what you hear on these podcasts. Next week's episode, we'll focus on the NFC South, preview the Bucs, Panthers, Saints, and Falcons. But I think that's everything I've got for you today, and I'll talk to you next time.